Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the February 21st, 2018 Lebanon Utility Service Board meeting. Before we get started here, I wanted to mention that we did have a working session prior to this meeting, which was properly advertised and no decisions were made. And looks like we got a full array of board members here today. With that, please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our February 7th, 2018 meeting.
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Motion made by Jim, seconded by Neil to approve the February 7th minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We're going to go ahead and merge together agenda items 4 and 5 that are listed on there and talk about a water rate adjustment, which is listed as an information item. And John is going to handle that for us. Please introduce yourself, John, and take over.
I'm John Leitner with Butler, Fairman, and Seifert. Let's get our PowerPoint pulled up. So I'm here today to talk about the Water Capital Improvement Plan and corresponding water rate adjustment. What today we'll cover is that Water Capital Improvement Plan projects. Andre Riley with Umball will be here to talk about the water rate adjustment. We'll answer any questions you guys might have. The Water Capital Improvement Plan projects were developed through a collaborative effort with the City of Lebanon, including the mayor, city engineer, and planner, and the Lebanon Utilities staff and BF&S and Umball. Worked together, probably had 4 or 5 coordination meetings to develop a good list of projects that we see being completed by the utilities, either on their own or in coordination with city projects in the near future. Ended up developing a report. This is a sample of the map that was developed showing some of the projects. Included in the CIP are recent projects that were funded with cash on hand, pretty much in there for information only. 4 recent projects with a total estimated project cost of about $3.8 million. 3 of these projects are at least 95% complete and 1 is just beginning. We have some potential projects that could be funded through TIF corresponding with city projects. The Courthouse Square Downtown Revitalization Project and the Main Street Water Main from Patterson Street to East Street. These projects total about $1.4 million. We identified projects that potentially could be funded through a future bond. Broken those into some phases, with phase 1 being projects that are estimated to start in 2018 or 2019. We identified 6 of those projects with an estimated total project cost of around $6,360,000. In our second phase, those would be projects that would start in 2020 or 2021. We identified 4 of those projects with an estimated total project cost of $4,735,000. With the CIP, we've put together a potential cash flow diagram for 2017 to 2021, basically just showing how the money would flow should we get funding. With a total project cost of $16,284,800, and that again includes some of those projects that are pretty much wrapping up. This is a potential funding diagram for those projects from 2017 to 2021. I'm looking at cash on hand, future bonds, and TIF funds. Throughout looking at these projects, we identified additional projects that would be completed potentially in 2022 or later. looking at some additional looping around the northeast side of the city. Estimated total project costs around $7,180,000. We also looked at some projects that could be funded from outside sources, such as developers, looking at some additional water mains and development of an additional water source. I'm going to introduce Andre to come up and talk a little bit more about a corresponding water rate adjustment.
Okay. Good afternoon, Board. My name is Andre Riley. I'm with the CPA firm of Umball. I'm a principal in the firm, and I'll talk a little bit about the finances of the utility. I'll kind of go back to a historical perspective, where you are today and what we anticipate to happen in the future. So this first slide shows from a historical perspective from 2014 through the test year ended 7/31/17, the revenues, the total revenues, total expenses, and the cash balances of the water utility. And as you can see, from 14 to 15, there was an increase, and that was the last phase of the 5-phase increase that was approved in 2010. And then you can see that the revenues are about $3.2 to $3 million a year. To that, the expenses have been hovering around $2.4 million, but in the test year, they did tick up. And a reciprocal perspective, the cash balances have been strong, healthy. The utility has been prudent with its cash as they've made investments and operated the utility. You can see the cash has hovered around $5.1 million. It did tick down a little bit in the test year because they started making investments into the system and using the cash that had built up over the previous rate increase. The next slide shows the operating revenues and expenses. The last slide, so total, this one just shows the operating expenses and revenues, and those are the revenues and expenses from providing the essential services or providing water to the customers of Lebanon. Again, you could see there was an uptick as that rate increase came into effect in August of 14. So the revenues were about $2.9 million. The expenses, as I mentioned before, just the operating expenses, the day-to-day expenses that operate the utility have ticked up. The three biggest drivers being increases in salaries, benefits, and then contractual services. This next slide kind of breaks the operating expenses down even further, with the biggest share being personnel expenses. Those are the benefits and salaries that I mentioned. Also, the next biggest piece of the pie is 14% of the contractual services, and then you can see the other expenses broken down. Also, depreciation. As the system ages, it depreciates at an average rate of about 2% a year. That's pretty standard with water utilities, and that's about 12% of those expenses. This next slide breaks down those cash balances you saw on the first slide even further. There's certain requirements as a water utility that thou must maintain certain cash balances within certain funds. You can see the bottom green number is the cash balances that have been maintained at each period shown, and that's gone from 500,000 up to $1 million down to 600,000. The next big piece of the pie is the depreciation fund. That's where you pull those dollars out to make those investments, those capital-like items, those end-of-life projects. You can see that trend down. The utility has made those investments over the last few years. As John mentioned, some of those projects are coming to end, and then there will be an additional draw on that cash as they continue to make some of those cash-funded projects. And then the next biggest piece is the availability fees. As people connect on, there's an availability fee, and as capacity projects have come up and the future projects that are going to be paid by cash, those funds will be used as well. This next slide kind of moves into the projects that John identified, the two phases, that let's call it the 18 phase and the 2020 phase. We've also added to it the TIF project. So this funding slide shows all the bond funded or the finance projects. The first phase being $7.9 million, that does include about $1.4 million of TIF funded projects. I believe the city will be closing on that financing in April. Then the second phase is $4.9 million. And you could see in that far right column the funding amounts. Also, we've anticipated that the utility will seek state revolving fund loans in two phases in 2018 and 2020. We have assumed conservative interest rates on those as they're closing a little bit into the future, especially the 2020 bond. And we've also assumed a 20-year standard subsidized financing term. And one of the reasons why we've been conservative in our estimates is as the PER develops and the approvals come from the state, we'll be able to look at those financings and be able to tweak them as we get the approvals from the state. But at this point in time, we thought it made prudent sense to look at them from a conservative perspective. With that, that first phase bond issue would be about, or the annual debt service on that would be a tick over $400,000. With that, then the 2020 rolls on. You can see that adds another $325,000. So all in over the next 20 years, or the assumed amortization period at this point, we're assuming about a $750,000 annual debt service payment. Once you get out to the paying full principal, we have that phased in. As the rates phase in, you can see that the annual debt service is phased in as well. And also, currently, the utility has no outstanding debt. This next slide shows pretty much the utility's budget. And we have that phased in as the rates phase in, or the assumed rates phase in. You can see that that budget is phased in as well. Starting in that first phase in 2018, it's about $3.4 million, going up to $4.9 million. As you can see, the debt ramps up. Also, there's going to be a reserve when you issue revenue bonds, whether through the open market or through the state revolving fund. They expect a reserve. Typically, that's your max or your maximum principal interest payment. That's about $400,000 a year. And then you can see also that the operating expenses, we have assumed inflationary increases on the operating expenses, the green section there, as the utility has averaged about 4.8% increase, or inflationary increases, or increases in operating expenses. This next slide just identifies that last phase in 2022. Again, the $4.9 million all-in budget, the $3.3 million of operating expenses, tack on to that $268,000 for the payment in lieu, $453,000 for the capital allowance that allows you to continue to make those annual investments. Regardless of the projects, there will still continue to be wear and tear on the assets. That's based on the depreciation that is calculated on the assets currently in the ground now. So that continues the utility of having funding or funding mechanism to make those investments. Then we have the debt service, $750,000, and then onto that, the debt service reserve. When you compare that to what the utility is bringing in from an operational standpoint now, that's a tick over $3 million. So there's a revenue gap of almost $2 million. So that revenue gap will be made up over those 5 phases. And this slide shows the rate increases needed from a dollar perspective with the first phase bonds. $4.30 in that first year, $3.77 in year 2020. Then as we roll on the phase 2 debt, you can see the $4.15 and the $3.06 for a total of $18.16 over those 5 phases. One of the things I would also like to point out is because phase 2 is still unknown as far as the dollar amount of those projects, as the engineering and the bidding has not happened, there will need to be a rate true up after that first phase and before the second phase. So these numbers could always change, but when you seek financing, you have to have the rates in place before financing so that the bondholders know that they'll be able to get paid back, essentially. This next slide shows a comparison of where Lebanon rates are currently, where they're going in 2018, and where similar like or surrounding communities where their rates are currently as well. With Carmel being at 26.67 and Whitestown up to 51.35, and that's for 5,000 gallons of usage per month. That does not include any tax or public fire protection or fire protection charge. That's just base rates only. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Questions from any of the board? I know we had quite a bit of discussion at our working session meeting regarding this topic, but if anybody's thought of any other questions, feel free.
I just actually have 2 questions.
Trace?
If we could go back to sheet 15. With the yellow there, it says personnel 50%. I'd like to know if that's typical for utilities in Indiana.
Microphone, Trace.
Oh, sorry about that. I'd like to know if the 50% for personnel is, for as far as expenditure goes, is that something that's typical for Indiana municipalities?
Let me try to answer that question. What I typically see for a lot of the communities that we work with at Umball, I'll normally see 50 to 65% of the annual operating expenses be driven by human costs or human capital, essentially. So that would include salaries and wages, benefits, or pay increases, other things like that. So that's
okay. So 50 to 65% is pretty normal. Okay. Thank you. Mm-hmm. The other question I have is on 19. Oops, sorry. Now I've done it. This one here, I noticed the green. I noticed with the green at the bottom, which is the expenses, the operating and maintenance expenses. And then if you go up to just the yellow line and you go to the far left, I've noticed that our test year, we're a little over $3 million. And in 2021, if we don't do something, we're going to use up all of our revenue in just operating and maintenance. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let me go back to this slide. Mm-hmm. So this slide shows that from operation or operating revenues for the test year ended 7/31/17, the utility was bringing in $3 million in just operating revenue. They bring in, just from that test year, I think there's another $300,000 of non-base revenue that's like availability fees, connection fees, reconnection fees, interest income. Those will vary year to year, but roughly about, let's say all in, you're about 3.2 million. Yes, right now you're pretty much covering your costs, but as let's say there's a trend line of the 5.8% increase in operation and maintenance expenses, you continue to make the payment in lieu and do the capital allowance of $453,000, yes, your revenues will be upside down.
Yeah, in about 2021, our revenue will be upside down.
Without a rate adjustment.
Without a rate adjustment. And I think that's really I think that's what we want to stress is really we have a need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, if there be no other questions, that was listed as an information item, so thank you very much, John and Andre. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is plant growth management for the 69 kV route, listed as an action item. Corby?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Board. Plant Growth Management, our partners in line clearance and vegetation management, have gone out for bid on Lebanon Utilities' behalf for tree removal and the line clearance portion of the 69 kV South Loop project. Plant Growth Management invited 4 contractors to bid this project. Of the 4 contractors, 2 submitted bid packages prior to January 31st, 2018 deadline. Based on the total schedule of work to be completed, Plant Growth Management would like to accept a quote from Williams Tree Company for $83,817.75. Tree Core Tree Service quoted $85,807.25. Plant Growth Management's fees to manage and audit the work throughout the completion process will be $2,200. It is my recommendation the Board approve an amendment to our agreement with Plant Growth Management for a not-to-exceed amount of $94,619.53. This will include a 10% contingency of $8,601.78 should unforeseen circumstances arise, allowing me to keep the project moving. Funding for this project will be available from the remainder of the 2013 electric bond.
Questions from the board? I got one. Was there a scope of work developed on this? I mean, did somebody go out and identify
Yes.
the areas that need
Yes,
to be
they've marked the
taken care
trees and there will be several trees removed, stumps ground, trimmed, several trees trimmed, 300 and some feet of bush hogging,
of? Okay.
underbrush off and stuff like that to clear the right of way.
Any other questions? Not, I would entertain a motion on that.
I'll make a motion that we approve Electric Manager Corby Unroe to proceed with an amendment to our agreement with Plant Growth Management for a not to exceed amount of $94,619.53 to manage the clearing of the route for the 69 kV transmission line.
To second that.
Motion made by Neil, seconded by Jim to approve the plant growth management bid. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Corey. Next item on the agenda is property acquisition for the 69 kV line, and our attorney Jeff is going to handle that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board, as you will recall, we are in the final phases of our land acquisition and easement acquisition related to the 69 kV project. There was one parcel in particular located at 501 East Noble Street that we have discussed at length, and staff and council was charged with acquiring that property. We prepared a uniform land acquisition offer for the entirety of the property based upon the appraisals that we had received. In addition to that, because we would be moving someone from their home, there are relocation expenses. And we have finalized that agreement Mr. Whitman, on behalf of the Utility Board, has signed that agreement, as well as the relocation expense agreement. We have yet to close on the property, but I'm asking the board to approve the uniform property acquisition offer as well as the relocation expense agreement for the property at 501 East Noble Street.
Questions from board members on that?
So you've reviewed all documents, prepared the documents, and have no heartburns?
Correct.
Okay. Then I would move to approve the offer to purchase real estate located at 501 East Noble Street, Lebanon, Indiana, as well as the agreement setting forth additional terms and conditions to the uniform property acquisition offer as signed by the general manager, Mike Whitman, and that the general manager be authorized to sign all necessary documents to close on the sale of the property.
Second.
Motion made by Dan, seconded by Neil to approve the property acquisition for the 69 kV line at 501 East Noble Street. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Board, one just update on that. I would anticipate sometime between now and June 1 closing on that property, and shortly thereafter we'll utilize some vehicle to put the property back on the market and resell it.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Next item is approval of claims.
I make a motion we approve the claims.
Second.
Motion made by Bill, seconded by Dan to approve the claims. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Other business, Mike has some GM comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Lebanon Utilities is your not-for-profit utility owned by you, the citizens of Lebanon. Our water department has had 2 of their team members receive certifications from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Steve Moringer, our water treatment plant operator, and Travis Brown, our water distribution system operator, passed their Water Works operations certification as distribution system large water system operators. The operators' certifications are designed to ensure public water systems operate effectively, efficiently, and safely. And since Lebanon is a distribution system large community, earning this certificate is of particular importance. Our congratulations to Steve and to Travis for their accomplishment. Our wholesale electric provider, Indiana Municipal Power Agency, has a residential energy efficiency program that offers residential customers of Lebanon Utilities the opportunity to earn rebates on qualifying heating, ventilation, and air conditioning installations. Our commercial and industrial customers that implement energy-saving measures can also receive incentives in 4 areas, including energy-efficient lighting, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, variable frequency drives, and refrigeration. Additional information, along with rebate amounts, can be found at impa.com/energy efficiency or by calling our customer service department. Also, in our customer service office is a container for your compact fluorescent light bulbs that are no longer usable. Working with Indiana Municipal Power Agency, we will properly recycle the bulbs, including the mercury that is in them. Supporting this program helps all of us work toward a better environment. If you have a standpipe or a floor drain in your basement, now is a time to make sure that these are properly plugged. Our wastewater collection crew has been monitoring the sanitary sewer pipes in town, and they are seeing a lot of clear water. This means with the expected rainfall, you could have greater potential of some water backing up into your basement without those items being plugged. In an effort to reduce the amount of rainwater that may come back in, in an effort to reduce the amount of rainwater that the sanitary system may be capturing, we remind you that sump pumps are not to be connected to the sanitary system at all. And I also appreciate the time that you have taken to be with us today. And finally, please remember, be safe out there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Other board comments? Look like it. With that, I would open it up to public comment. Does anyone in the audience have any comments? Doesn't look like it. With that, our next board meeting date is March 7th, scheduled for 5 p.m. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Neil, seconded by Jim to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you very much and have a good evening.